share your call story. Where does it begin and what does it do? Most of you probably have never had to share it. Me, Geisel, and Joy have had to share it over and over and over again. So depending on the audience, we tell a different story each time. Abraham's story begins in the midst of a troubled world. So, what happens up to Genesis 12? We have the first humans who end up having brothers who fight and one kills the other. And from that legacy, we have a family full of trauma. A family that doesn't know how to get over the generational trauma they have. And each generation tries to do things a little differently. And so we get to Noah, and God says, I'm through with all you people. And he saves Noah, the family, and the animals. Not my favorite story, by the way. I think it's horrible. But his hope, God's hope, was that this would be a reset and humans would get it right this time. But most of you never read the story right after the story of Noah's Ark, which is that Noah is drunk in his tent and maybe does things with his son that are not kosher. It's not looking good for this family that is full of trauma, that doesn't know how to be their best selves. Maybe doesn't even know what that would look like. And so, right before the genealogy of Abram, we get the story of the Tower of Babel. Again, sorry, the people of the world decide that they can build a tower up to God. And God decides, you know what? Maybe this having you all together is not a good thing. Let's try separating you. So he gives them all separate languages and sends them to separate corners of the world. And then we hear the genealogy of Abram. And what we learn about this genealogy is that there must have been trauma within his immediate family. Because what we learn is that Abram's father leaves his family. So all of them are Chaldeans. But his father leaves them and settles in Haran with Abram, his wife Sarai, and Abram's nephew Lot. And it's into that spot, into the story that we don't know is a story, but we know something happened that made Abram's father leave his family behind. And so we get to the story of Abram, which at this point he doesn't have his new name yet. We're actually going to skip that story, so maybe on Wednesday I'll share that with you. Abram, in that new place, here's a call. Now, I want to stop at, in Genesis, everybody's name is important. Because everybody's name means something. Like my name is stupid. It means female of Charles. So has no meaning, right? But every biblical name is actually a word in Hebrew that tells you something about them. And so Abram means eternal father. So for 75 years, with no children in sight, he has been called eternal father. Could you imagine the pain that must give you? If Everybody in your life is always saying to you, who are your children? What do they do? Right? How many do you have? And every time he has to share the painful story of not being able to have children. And have everybody call him Eternal Father. And so Eternal Father is invited to a new journey. God speaks to Abram and says, you are going to be a blessing. Your life is meant to be a blessing. I am going to be with you as people bless you and curse you, but you will be a blessing to the entire world. Can you imagine that as your call story? That God says to you, you will be blessed. I'm going to show you the place where you will belong. That your children's 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 children will belong. And I will give you children. And he, who is 75, looks at his wife, equally as old, and goes, I don't know what you're talking about. This has not happened so far. But even though he may have doubts about the whole children thing, he and Sarai and Lot set off to be a blessing for the world. When I tell my call story, it depends on what I'm going to say about it. And so today I want to do a blessing for the world call story. When I was 9 or 10, God showed me an image of the world laid out before me. And I always took that as a sign that God was with me, and that was all I needed. Until I went to seminary and they said we had to write call story papers. And we had to analyze what that story meant. And until that point, I had talked about the sparkling atoms and the light and the flowers and seeing everything. I hadn't talked about it as a call. As a, you're being pushed to do something with it. And so when I was in seminary, as you have to think about what's next. Like, if you get this degree, what kind of job are you going to take? What kind of person are you going to become? That story changed a little bit for me because I was having this vision, and this is in the time of the 80s when they had all these evangelical conferences that were going around the country where they would have these amazing praise bands singing and dancing and lots of praying and tons of people filling up stadiums. And I was like, I want to do that for the earth. I want to be the person who goes around the country and everybody comes to sing songs about the earth and learn about environmentalism and how God calls us to protect creation. But not really a realistic dream of how do I feed my son. So that dream's always been there in the back, that God is calling me to do something about the earth. But what? And so when I was faced with my first decision about a job, I was driving this red pickup truck through Iowa, way far away from the biggest city, which was Ascoli in Nebraska, into this house that had a phone that was separate from each other that you would put like this. You would speak here and you would put it to your ear. And I was like, I can't do this. This is not my spot, even though they've offered me the job. Maybe because I was the only person who agreed to come. But I'm like, they gave me a pickup truck to drive. My other choice was go way far away to Wyoming to an open and affirming congregation in the middle of the state that I had never been to. In the middle of the state that I knew nothing about except that Dick Cheney came from there. In the middle of the state that at least had a population of 75,000 people in the town and had a college in the city. And I thought, well, that's got to be better than the one-room school that Reed would be going to. So we packed our bags, packed my car, and I thought, oh no, I made a mistake because I got a speeding ticket on the way out of Illinois. Because this truck was on my tail, and I was like, it's driving me nuts. And so all of a sudden, he's disappeared, and the cop gets me, and I'm like, and it's the truck's fault. Then we get to Wyoming, and it's a little bit windy there, if you've ever been to Wyoming. They have signs that say, high wind advisories, semi-trucks do not take the highway. That sign was flashing that day. We turned on the highway, and there was a truck over on its side. And I'm like, God, are you sure you really wanted me to come to Wyoming? Because it's not looking good so far. But I needed to learn stuff. I needed to learn stuff about being a pastor. Like, for instance, you bought these chairs so that you could move them, right? They aren't fastened to the floor. They're able to be turned any way we want. When was the last time you moved them? Well, in my first church, they said the same thing to me. We bought the chairs to move them. They didn't tell me that for 50 years they had never moved the chairs. So I moved them. I learned at that moment that church people tell you their hopes, but not the reality. And that sometimes their hopes and visions don't necessarily match what they say they want. Now, I'm a little bit like Abram in that when God says go, I go, and sometimes I end up in really odd places. So there I am in Wyoming, but I get to protest in front of the Dick Cheney Federal Building every week with the women in black. I get to start a P flag, the only P flag in the entire state of Wyoming in my church, where people from all around the state come to learn about what it means to support the LGBTQIA+ community. To have a spot where they come together, share food, share stories, laugh and sing and play games. Something that I hadn't imagined was possible. But God said, do this. And I said, sure. And then the church people had to follow along. Then God, because of trauma within the system, said, you're going to Pennsylvania. And my son looked at me and said, are you nuts? I said I wanted out of Wyoming, but I want California. And God's sending us to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, a church, again, full of trauma. And me having to be an interim minister that I didn't realize I was an interim minister, stepping into, again, all the things people tell you they want but don't really want. They sound like a good idea, but we only want people who are just like us. And just like us has always been one type of person. In this case, it was Pennsylvania Dutch. And I had to figure out how to fit in a system that I didn't really fit in. And my son hated it. So, me and God made a deal to move to Wisconsin where I'd be 45 minutes away from my mom. And then me and God made another deal to move 45 minutes south of my mom. And my son moved to California because remember, when he was 9, he decided that's where he was going to live. And so I started, I don't know, I think I started when we were in Pennsylvania trying to get a job in California because that's where he wanted to be. And when I read your profile, I said, this is the most interesting church God has ever offered me. I have never been in a church where people have been intentionally chosen to come together across boundaries. Things that make them different. That this is the blessing to the world that I've been looking for. And let's face it, y'all had trauma in your history. You still have trauma in your history. And God says, how do you work through that trauma? And it's a slow process, right? Trying to figure out how do we become one, but all the many at the same time. Sort of like what's going on with Abraham, right? Abram at this point, it said, you are to be a blessing to the world. You are to be the one who brings the world together, spreads out into it, has a ministry in it, will repopulate the world with a people. So how do we think about what it means to be a blessing to the world? So now I want to get back to my vision of being the rock star pastor speaking about the environment. I had been looking at that lot forever, going, we got to do something about the weeds. There's this space that can be something. And Jonathan and Annabelle's son first tried to hook me up with a farmer who wanted to grow Asian plants, but they found a better place to be, and so that fell through. And then everybody was trying to talk me into, you got that space and we could build low-income housing there. And I, with TCIC, started visiting places, and I thought, ooh, that's a lot of work. Is that something that we would want to take on because it requires all sorts of wraparound services? And then there was the bee. The bee that said, I'm going to inhabit the preschool. And Phil, who looks like Santa Claus and is just as cheerful, came and saved the bees, taking him to his beehive, and said, what are you doing with that lot? He didn't say that to me. It took another 4 months for God to get that question to my question. And I brought it to you that they wanted to put up a native garden, grow native plants, and as a nonprofit, spread those native plants around. And if you noticed out front, hundreds of native plants now that are growing. That in exchange for them putting up their buildings, they will make our church re-native, re-wild. But God, like Abram, who next week we're going to visit an oak tree, shared with me a vision about oak trees. Well, no, for me it was mostly, I think we should build a chapel out in the back that's made out of trees. And I'm going to show you the pictures one day. Phil, who is the tree god, drew this amazing structure, a chapel out of trees, calling it the Three Oak Chapel. So the Abram story comes back in. That in 15 years, 10 years, there will be a place out there that nobody else in the state of California has. That will be a place for people to come. When they say, I find God outside, we can say, come. We've got that space for God to be outside with you. Come and pray with me. Come and meditate with me. Come and do yoga with me. Well, maybe not yoga. But we could find somebody to do yoga. I could do the meditating. But come. Come into this space where God will have a house. Come into this space where you can learn how to encounter God in a way that isn't so random, but is comfortable, that is steady, that is continuous. And then I met, and I don't remember his name, but I think it starts with a K, who said to me, so you have Samoan members? Can we grow taro out in your yard? And I said, awesome. And he said, here's what I've tried before. When we get the plan all built, we're going to grow taro out there. It may not be the big edible kind, but you'll be able to eat the leaves because it's probably only going to have little corns. But how amazing that he could take this idea when we were just chatting about the honey on his table and say to me, we can make this a spot that means something to all of us. When God says to Abram, you are going to be a blessing to the world, we sometimes think it means the rock star. But sometimes it's that steady presence that follows God along the path that winds in weird ways, ends up in Egypt and back to the land again, always under oak trees. But a path that steadily works to heal a family through a trauma. A path that steadily builds a blessing to the world. A path that comes with its own problems, but a path that also comes with its hopes and shares with us what a faith journey looks like. That it's not always all uphill and beautiful. That sometimes it winds and cracks and makes you stop and do things that we just can't even comprehend. But also, you in your flawed, unperfect self are called forth to be a blessing. It's not meant to be big. It doesn't have to be big. But it's meant to help you find a place to belong. And it's meant to help you figure out how you can bless the world. And, did you catch the first part? Even if you are 75 years old, you can hear that call. There's something that God has for you on the journey. Amen.